Yes, Vicky, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's seminar for the linguistics series. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Vicky Lai. She's visiting from the University of Arizona for a week together with part of her team of PhD students and her co-PIs, even better, who will give a talk tomorrow. Vicky Lai is currently professor, well, split between the Department of Psychology and the Cognitive Science program. Her training is, I would say, between linguistics and the neuroscience of language. She graduated in linguistics in Taiwan, at Taiwan University with Kathleen Arends, and then moved to Colorado for the PhD. Then she was postdoctoral fellow in, well, both in the UK and at the Max Planck in Nijmegen. And then she joined the University of Arizona. Vicky's research always has always centered around the notion of metaphor throughout the different positions that she took. And I think that she is touching upon the most interesting topics in metaphor studies, both metaphor processing from a more neuroscience of language point of view, but also metaphor and the interface with the emotional, social embodiment aspects. And at the moment, she has a grant with the National Science Foundation in the US. And it is thanks to this grant that she's visiting our lab within a program, an exchange program between NSF grantees and ERC grantees. And this project is about metaphor as a tool for learning scientific concepts. So a very up-to-date topic. I was talking recently with Hamad Al-Azari, who was here 1 year ago, more or less. And he will host the next RAM conference in the US on metaphor and science. And he was telling me that this is basically the most up-to-date topic possible because learning scientific concept, learning STEM sciences is the big thing now in the States. So again, a proof of how metaphor really can interact with different domains. So, and I think that Vicky really touched upon these different domains with important seminal contribution, and I'm sure that this new project that she's running would lead to important findings, and we hope to collaborate with her for our research. So thank you, Vicky and team, for being here, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Valentina. It's a very lovely introduction. But there's not only NSF, but it's also because we have the ERC grant that's made it possible. So yeah, because the grant is to strengthen, like in the US side, you have a grant, and then the ERC side is also the grants are related basically. So we're both on metaphor, different aspects of metaphors, but for, grant funders, they see this as similar. So they want to have the synergy between our groups. Okay, so let's start with just first to, yeah, good. It's okay, give it. Yeah, okay. All right, we have participants on Zoom, 5 people. You can all hear me okay, people on Zoom? Yes? If not, let us know. Yeah, so this is, yeah, okay, excellent. So, good. So this is our lab, and you've met 3 of them here on this side. So we have Laura, Laura here, Lindsay here, and Chatai here. Chatai actually wears a shirt that says,
Yeah, I saw it. Metaphor, be with you, without.
that's right. So, okay, so this is who we are, and this is what we do in general. This is just generated using paper titles, so not the content in paper. And, remove preposition and all that kind of thing. It's a word cloud. So as you can see, language is mostly right in the center, and then within language, we look at metaphors and emotional language, and etc. And so for this talk, it's going to be metaphor and learning. And
That's me, sorry.
oh, that's right. And here are the collaborators that have contributed to the talk content that you're about to see in the next 4 minutes. How long do I have? 45 minutes? Or
It's more or less,
40
yes.
minutes?
45. Don't worry if it's 50.
Okay. So just to start with the linguistic phenomenon of metaphor, well, I know that this is a metaphor group, so everybody knows that there are all kinds of different types of metaphors. And here in this project, we're not so strict on the exact type of metaphors, like nominal metaphors, predicate metaphors, and so on and so forth. So many teachers use metaphors to teach. Probably many have seen this, a cell is a city kind of metaphor. So here are some of the research questions that started this grant. We know this phenomenon of the metaphors and the teachers using metaphors, but we don't know if this is exactly effective. There's been a few studies that looked at this, not a lot, and some said, yes, this works. But those people, like the study that you saw like on the slide for middle schoolers, the way they probe the learning effectiveness is through essay writing. And then after the students write the essays, then the grader looks at the essay and to determine that they show deeper thinking. So that kind of assessment is less ideal, I would say less objective. And then there's also another study that showed that, they taught high schoolers US Constitution, and they use metaphor and non-metaphors. And they show that metaphoric way of talking about the US Constitution leads to better recall. But then it depends on the format of the test. So the format means whether it's multiple choice questions or short answer questions. So if it's multiple choice questions, there's no effect. And if it's short answer, then there is some effects. And so that's the first thing that we're looking at in this grant. And then the second thing is that I'm interested in the cognitive neural mechanisms for metaphoric reasoning. And this is more basic science, so less applied, more about the neural mechanisms. And then there is another point is how can we scale up this situation or perfect this metaphoric learning? Because this probably doesn't work for everyone. Some people could be more literal. So we want to accommodate those individual differences and also cross-linguistic differences, which is what my PhD students are here to conduct, metaphoric learning in second language learners, specifically Italian learners of English. So for this grant, we have a bunch of hypotheses and predictions, and I will say out front that none of this is published yet, most of them in prep, with the down projects. And so we'll go through them one by one. So for most of the studies, we had a basic paradigm, which is, we have a pre-test and a post-test. And then there is a learning session in between, where students learn concepts metaphorically and literally. Okay. So here is an example of an item. So for literal condition, it's just all literal. So this basically we got these items from textbooks. So leukocytes help rid of the body of illness. I don't know if you can see because there is no pointer. Oh, that's okay. That's okay, I'll just read through. So if you look at the blue part of it, you can see leukocytes help rid the body of illness or diseases. And its counterpart is leukocyte is the body's warrior that fights germs. So the warrior metaphor for that. So this is the basic paradigm. And so initially we tested pilots. So everybody in the, I don't know if you know that, but in the US, if you want to get a grant, you need to first show that it works. But how do you show this works without grant funding to support it? That's a myth still, even at my stage. But so we show the pilot. So we run about 30 participants. And these are 13 to 17-year-old, and this was conducted by an honors student in my lab. So we found that, yeah, it seems to work. So if you look at the graph, you have the metaphorically taught and the literally taught at the bottom, and the y-axis is the learning improvement score, scores for before, which means the pre-test score, and after is the post-test score. So the gray bars are the post-test scores. So you can see that, okay, there is some learning here, and more the difference between the, so look at the metaphorically taught, compare the gray bar and the dark gray bar, and that difference is bigger than the literally taught concept. But this is based on short answer questions. We didn't find any significance there based on multiple choice questions. So, and in addition, we looked at, so here are the 13 to 17-year-olds, right? So we just selectively looked at 17 years old. So the total number of participants was only 30. So if we restrict to 17-year-olds, so you're really just looking at something like 5-6 participants, okay? So here, similarly, you see that the effect is the strongest in the 17-year-old students. So the 13-year-old actually show nothing. So, but then, you know, so you see this, there could be an age difference. So that's, you know, so that basically helped us get this grant. So now we're doing a thorough investigation, and Lindsay will talk about that on this, because when I say thorough, we have to increase the sample size, which is the number of participants, to see if this still works. So that is still work in progress. Okay, and then so the second thing is then we want to look at the cognitive and neural basis. So for cognitive basis, I use EEG, and for neural basis, I use fMRI. So so the hypothesis is such that metaphoric reasoning makes the science concepts being reasoned about more concrete. And science concepts here, I view them as abstract. So many people might say, so the science concept here, we actually use biology concepts. And so you would say, why, you know, we're all scientists. So look at biology terms like, okay, leukocyte seems very concrete. It actually exists in the real world. So here we define abstractness by saying that that's something you don't interact with often. So, you know, at the cellular level, you don't actually interact with them, not experience-based. So, so that's what we mean by abstract concepts. And the prediction here is that concepts after metaphoric reasoning will show an enhanced neural signature of concreteness in comparison to concepts, the very same concepts after literal reasoning. Okay. So we're not measuring at the metaphors, we're measuring brainwaves at the concepts. So that's a huge difference compared to what my old work always measured at the metaphors. So it's different. Okay, so and what's a neural signature of concreteness, you might ask? From the EEG perspective, here's how people have been looking at word concreteness. So in an EEG experiment, participants read concrete words and abstract words. So a concrete word is something like banana, okay? And then abstract words is something like justice, relatively abstract. So you take the signals, brain signals for those two kinds of words, and then you put them together, then you get this kind of ERP pictures. Oh, is this the, no. Okay. So actually, maybe I can use this red thing. Pen and laser pointer to it. Laser pointer, yeah. Yay. Okay, so here is the map. So EEG thing, so you can see abstract words were represented by this solid black line. Concrete words are the represented by this dotted line. And here is the effect of interest. You can see a condition difference at around 400 milliseconds after the onset of the target word. And it is a it's a negative, so positive is plotted up on the y-axis. It's in microvolts. So just basically more negative M400 here for concrete words for the dash line here in comparison to the abstract words. And the effect, so this little circle here represents the head, and that triangle up there is the nose. So the effect is here, basically left anterior part. I'm sorry, this is right. So right anterior part, frontal is what you have for the ERP effects of word concreteness. So that is our dependent variable. And we're gonna see if, so we're gonna call that a concreteness M400. And that's gonna be our neural signature of word concreteness here. And we'll see how it works. And so, okay. So then here's the design. And remember that basic paradigm. So we still use that basic paradigm. It's just that participants were recorded twice. So there's the EEG recording 1. And the experiment actually went very quickly because it's a single word, right? Leukocyte. So before learning, they came in for an EEG recording session. And then they learned, this learning is EEG off, okay? So they're more comfortable. They're actually, this was actually conducted in a, oh, no, actually it's in the lab, yeah, I was gonna say. That was the different study. And so after learning, they came back for a second EEG recording session within a week. Because we actually iron out this procedure, if you ask them to come back 2 weeks later, they remember nothing. And then, so within a week is what, at least US undergrads in the US, you know, within a week is actually also quite important. Okay, so this is that. So we're gonna compare ERP here, that's the before, and that is the after learning. And we're gonna see how their ERPs differ. Okay. Right, so EEG data collection and analysis. This is an actual RA in our lab, and they were doing the EEG cap, and then they read computer. So this is actually not in our lab, but it was my old lab at the next one. And then we use the brain vision analyzer software to analyze this data. So I would say this is one slide, but this is like 6 months of work. Okay, and so next, so this is our results. So again, our ERPs are time locked to the concept word. Okay, so before learning, you will see. So the blue line is the literally taught words, or to be exact, it should say to be taught literally, and the red line should be to be taught metaphorically, because they haven't been taught, they haven't been learned, and they should not have any difference in the pre-learning phase. And then we inserted some pseudo words in there too. I use the black line because that's the basically the baseline. So it's good that the pseudo words gave a good solid M400, because that means that the ERP study worked. It's a sanity check. So that's before learning. So now we're going to look at after learning. So we did observe a very small but significant difference between the metaphorically taught words. So that's the red line here, in comparison to the literally taught words, the blue line. And that effect is exactly, here's a layout of the sensors. And so the effect is exactly significant at the right anterior site. So this is good. So that's our results. So then we showed that the main finding is that concepts after metaphorical reasoning indeed showed an enhanced neural signature of concreteness in comparison to the literally reasoned, taught, learned words. Okay, so this is the EEG part of it. And next, we wanna look at whether those concepts have become better integrated in the language semantic network in the brain. So here's an fMRI study, and the prediction is that concepts after metaphoric reason will show activations in regions implicated in semantic memory for language. So what are those regions? Sorry, let me show you. What are those regions? So when we started literature search, we looked at what regions were most cited for language semantics. And I say, because there's a difference between, if you ask a memory researcher, semantics means a different thing compared to linguists. So we're more interested in language semantics here. Although you could say this experiment does not have to be linguistic, right? Because the words are concept words, those concepts cued by words. You're testing the concepts. But we'll go there later if needed. So these are the regions of interest. So angular gyrus is a cross-modal hub where converging multi-sensory information is combined and integrated for a person to comprehend concepts. There's also the region called anterior temporal lobe, and it's situated the anterior portion of the temporal lobe. And it is very important in combinatorial semantics beyond words. Okay, so this is some work done by Lena Buchanan, if you know her, on ATL in combinatorial semantics. Obviously, if you go to a different lab, like, for example, Peter Hagel would say, combinatorial semantics, of course, it's in the left inferior frontal gyrus. But that's another debate. And then we have the posterior singular cortices, which combine newly learned information from existing semantic knowledge. So these are our regions of interest. Going back one slide to the paradigm we use there. So the fMRI study is a little more complicated, and we scan once only, not twice, because scanner is more expensive. It's just a practicality concept. So so it's more like between participants, so you have, it's not the same participant scanned before and after, like the EEG. It's the, different participants. They all learn metaphorically and literally, but in the end, we only scan once here. So they come in, they do a pre-test, and then the last part is the post-test. Between the pre-test and the post-test, you have day 2 here says supervised training. And this study and so they actually did a Zoom basically with the supervised training. So, and these are actually college students. So these are not teenagers, college students. So they first did the supervised training number 1, and then we split it number 2. What we did 2 training sessions with several intentions in mind. One is that because in sleep research, in learning research, there is a consolidation. So if you learn something and you sleep overnight or take a nap, then your memory is better consolidated. So we want to see that effect, the day 1, day 2 effect. The second reason is that students just cannot take that many concepts in one sitting. If you ask them to learn something for like 2 straight hours, they just, in the end, they're just tired. Us too, right? If you ask us to learn like 2 hours, I do think that this talk is not going to be 2 hours. So, okay, so they do the same thing. So for instance, this is the example of a trial. There's the experimenter on Zoom and student on Zoom. And then the experimenter share screen, show the slides. For example, iris. The iris is the camera diaphragm, which regulates the amount of light that enters the eye. Okay. So that's a metaphoric trial. We have looked at the regions of interest. And now the results. So I'm going to show you a series of 3 results. So contrasting metaphorical learned with literally learned concepts. And in the left angular gyrus, we did see activations, small but very but significance. Again, a lot of these effects are just very small, which makes sense. In neuroscience, often you use like scrambled sentences, or like completely anomalous part to do to serve as the control. But here we're comparing normal sentences or normal concepts with normal concepts. So correct word with correct word instead of correct versus anomalous. So we're comparing both are possible correct words. So what do we know about angular gyrus in addition to what I mentioned earlier? So basically, again, angular gyrus combining concepts to form meaningful representations, specifically, and that is independent of the modality of the semantic content integrated. So so that's angular gyrus. And the second, I wrote it there, sorry. Okay. And the second region, the ATL, the anterior temporal lobe, also combinatorial semantics, as I mentioned, Lena Buchanan's work. But interestingly, it's not in the left ATL, it's in the right hemisphere, right? And ATL for this. It's basically, so quoting Buchanan, she suggests that the right side of the ATL is an engagement of the right hemisphere in situations where more global processing of meaning is required. So less local, more global for this concept work after metaphoric learning. Right, more global processing of meaning. And then the third region is bilateral left PCC. So here is also more enhanced. And so the basic function of this area, according to literature, is that it combines both new episodic information and stored semantic knowledge. So imagine for a concept you have learned metaphorically, it becomes more episodically related. And right here, semantic retrieval and episodic encoding systems for complex meaning. So in other words, the meaning of the word has become more complex. So, oops, what just happened? Oops, okay, it's also fine. Review a little bit. Okay, so based on the activations in those regions, we can say one step close to say that it's better integrated in the semantic network in the brain. You can also ask about what about areas in the brain that is more that are more sensitive to concreteness. Okay, so that is a study that we're doing, metaphorically speaking, and Chatai will tell you more about this later, hopefully. Okay, so those are the two studies, and I'm gonna go through a third study, and then we'll probably stop. But so the third study here is relatively new compared to the, so it's about production. So far we looked at comprehension. We looked at metaphoric items prepared by us, experts, we think that we're experts, and to for students. But production is, learning by comprehension versus learning by production has got, those are kind of different things. So here we wanted to, but before we work on that step, whether production helps learning more than comprehension, which is the next bullet point, we wanted just to understand the EEG representation of metaphoric production. And so here is a study that we collaborated with people at Northwestern University, and we're looking at the EEG oscillatory basis of metaphor production. And these people we collaborate with are creativity researchers. Okay? So generating verbal metaphors is a creative act. Literature on verbal creativity tells us that there's like a whole set of verbal creativity tasks. So from the very classic alternative uses test, so they just take a very common object like a chair and say, come up with an alternative use of this object. And then that's classic. And then there's also the remote association task. So they give you 3 words, and then they ask you to come up with a word that is related to all 3 words. So remote association. And then there's definitely metaphor production by Benedek and Beatty. Those people, they are fMRI people. So they have done that using measuring fMRI when people produce metaphors. But the production there is also very, how do you say this, laboratory based. So they gave some prompts, actually heavily prompt, and then they produce, participants produce metaphors. But as you will see in our study, we're actually quite natural. We just ask the students to come up with metaphors. And then there's a poetry creation, this again, again, fMRI study. Creative writing, participants just write creatively, and then fMRI, then they're being scanned. And then story production, so storytelling. You tell a story in the scanner, okay, and then measure the activations. So very little, actually nearly none used EEG in the past. On metaphor production, but they have been looking at other types of verbal creativity, and they found some activities in the alpha band, which is oscillation in the 8 to 12 hertz range. In specifically, high alpha power during data generation has been associated with verbal creativity. And it's actually really hard for scientists to measure creativity. It's actually basically, these are creativity researchers, and they told me that there's just no consensus on what's creative and what's not. So oftentimes when they say creativity, it's novelty, like how novel this is, okay. So after reading, being journal in the literature for a while, so we thought, okay, metaphor generation would probably lead to oscillatory activities in the alpha frequency band. And in addition, I'm sorry?
Increase or decrease?
Increase, yeah, increase. We also thought about, so I didn't write it down here, but in our lab, we also have done EEG work on idioms, but comprehension, not production. So in idiom comprehension, we also observe gamma. So that's a high gamma, so like 60 to 90 hertz of gamma, which you can say, okay, I don't believe in high gamma, but some people don't because they say that's just muscle activities. But but we reported that as well. It was published, actually, that one was published in Psychophysiology. Anyways, so here we are looking at the experimental design. Oh, and here I show the pictures of my collaborators, Yuhua Wu and Mark Beeman at the Northwestern University. Yuhua is a senior PhD student. In fact, she must have defended because it's May. And she's going to do a postdoc at the University of Arizona, not with me, but with a colleague of mine. So we're going to be seeing her more than before. So here's the metaphor generation. So, and Lindsay is involved in this work as well. My student, Lindsay, sitting there. So she can correct me if I say something wrong. So here is the experimental trials. So first you see ready, and then the concept alele here. And then there's the concept description is 8 to 12 seconds. So it's exactly like the example I showed you at the beginning of the talk. But this description could be literal or metaphoric. Oh, actually, there is no literal conditions here, just metaphoric. And so after they learn the concept, and the students are supposed to create a metaphor. You ask them, like, can you create a metaphor for alele? Okay. At first I thought, oh, this is mission impossible. If you ask me to create a metaphor on the fly, I wouldn't be able to. But apparently students did well. So it's under a minute. So on average, they were asked to press a button when they have something in mind. And then that's, basically under 1 minute, they've done it. And then the next screen says, enter your metaphor. So they have to enter the metaphor. And then they were asked, because Yuhua's research question is primarily, did you get it from insight or analysis? So I don't know if people are probably not familiar with insight research. Insight is that when you solve a problem, how does the solution come to you? Is it an insight thing, it's a light bulb, or you're analytical, you have to analyze, is this, time is money because time is resource and money is resource also, so that's more analytical way of thinking. So her research is primarily about insight analysis. And then we also have this, for the generated metaphors, we ask participants to rate your own metaphor, rate your own creation on novelty and aptness. And then we also have an objective raters, so we call that crowd raters. And then they're asked to also rate the product novelty and aptness. Because people can be very criticizing their own creation, right? So we compare the self and crowd rating. Might be interesting. Okay, so that was the data collection, and then there's a missing slide here on data collection. That's an entire semester of hard work. 55 participants, mostly done by Lindsay. So that data collection, okay, a semester later, we have the data. And then we have the analysis now here. And this is primarily Yuhua's analysis. It's called hidden Markov model. And I don't know the details, but I will try here. First they take an EEG signal. This is a raw data. So the pre-processing includes something like downsample, plain line noise, and all kinds of independent component analysis, and then cut them into different spectra powers. So we looked at, here we're more data driven. So as I mentioned, alpha and gamma are two that we're interested in, but we also throw in beta and theta because of creativity research, Well, so that's based on literature, so it's a priori, not exactly data. Well, we combine both. So here's what's interesting about collaboration, because Yuhua is more of a neuroscientist, and when she does this hidden Markov model, she insists that this is data-driven. But in my opinion, we have all this literature pointing to alpha and gamma. So that to me is not just data-driven, it's also theory-driven, literature-driven. So, because we didn't go look at some weird other frequency bands, but we also have a little focus there. Okay, so they do the decoding using the hidden Markov model, and then to see brain state during metaphor generation. So here is not time locked to a specific word. So usually when you look at ERP data, they are time locked to a specific word, but now it's not. It's just is that a question? Okay. What happened? Okay.
They're all at the same time, but mine seems to be.
Did it go away black? Okay. Maybe that was the hidden Markov model. But anyways, so then on this different columns here, you can see theta 4 to 8 hertz all the way to high gamma 55 to 90. And so in this model, it takes the generation. So the generation period was I mentioned that it's less than 1 minute participant created a metaphor, right? So we take that minute. Was it a minute? I think it was a minute.
Yeah.
Yes, recording. And then just store it into this model. And then the model tells you brain state. So how long this brain stays in the state of alpha, the state of gamma, or the state of beta. So and so there's a lot of methodological decision here. For example, you will tell the computer, you tell the algorithm, we want to see 6 states. And so the algorithm then automatically sorted everything into, say, So it matters, like you can tell the algorithm, put it in 15 states and it will do it mathematically. But then what does each state really mean? I'm still thinking about it. I think you might be more confident than I am, but I think wait a second, so there are different states. But she did use a method to make sure that it's not overfitting the data. So then the ideal number of states is like 6 or 7, which is funny to me because in psychology, the magic number of 7, like you always think that how many states can your brain to be in at the same time. But anyway, so these are the states that your brain spend most time in. So we have alpha something called gamma. So alpha came out, and then gamma also came out. So here, the redder it is, the more activity increased power there is. And then there's also a desynchronization. Okay, so this is alpha desynchronization, and this is synchronization. So the next 3 slides, we'll see this 1, 2, 3, these 3 states plotted over time, and also to associate this brain state occupancy with metaphor novelty. So just to see, so the first one is alpha state occupancy. How am I doing on time?
That's okay.
So yeah, this is the third study. Will end at the end of the third study. So so there is a onset lot. So the onset is when we play the audio description of the concept, because some people might start generating already while they're still listening to the description of the concept. So there's onset lot, and this is skip because too long. And then response lot means, the time when they press the response to say they have a metaphor in their head, so lot here. So, and so as you can see, or not, but the main takeaway from the slide is that more time spent in an alpha synchronization state means more novel metaphors. Both for the blue line represents the self-rated, so, and then so the bottom is the self-rated and the top is the crowd-rated. Okay. So, and the blue line is high self-novelty and the red line is the low self-novelty here. Likewise, on the top, high novelty versus low novelty. Okay, so this is the correlation. And then, well, it's actually correlation because we put novelty through these all of the variables plus RTs. So RTs is more like just to make sure that they are similarly effortful. But then it's actually a regression, right? Okay. So for the desynchronization state, it's not significant for the crowd ratings. For self ratings, only the response log. So this here is significant. So which says more time spent in an alpha desynchronization state in the later trial stage. So closer to the response when they press the button to say that they have a metaphor. And that means more, that's equal to, similar to more self-rated novel metaphors. Okay. And then the third one is gamma, okay? So I'm just gonna read a takeaway message, which is more time spent in a gamma synchronization state is less novel metaphors, so more conventionalized. And that's interesting to us, to me in particular, because as I mentioned that we did idiom studies in our lab, and that's more like gamma, and idioms are less novel. Right, idioms are more frozen, more conventional, and so that so that actually makes sense. Okay, so the takeaway from the hidden Markov model analysis is that from this study actually is that so for Yuhua and creativity researchers like Mark Beeman and Yuhua, they think that this extends literature on the role of EEG oscillations in creative ideation in the context of generating new metaphors, because nobody has used this metaphor production task in EEG. Unlike fMRI, people have looked at fMRI of metaphor production. And the second part is that both alpha band synchronization and desynchronization were associated with increased metaphor novelty. So that's a new finding. And this basically tells us that synchronization and desynchronization are not necessarily opposite. Okay? They could mean different, and the different trial stages. That just means that right before participants produce a metaphor, and also when they were listening to the audio recording of the concept word. So those are different trial stages. Okay, so then the third contribution is methodological. So people could say, why don't you just do time frequency band analysis instead of using that? Well, time frequency band analysis requires time locking to a specific word. A hidden Markov model, you take 1 minute of recording, you throw it in the algorithm, and it outputs these results. So that's interesting to me because, oftentimes, language processing can be slow and can be fast, but it can also be slow, right? So if it's the immediate, fast, early kind of processing, we want to use the kind of methodology that time locks basically to a specific word. For a slower, perhaps this creative kind of processing, a period of time, like a minute, is required to really output a metaphor idea. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of this talk. Looking at the production, the neural basis or the EEG basis of production. So the next bullet points are all still ongoing. Lindsay is looking at whether production helps more than comprehension. And she's also doing some exciting research using ChatGPT to help with metaphoric learning. And then Laura as well, her main research is emotion and metaphor, but she's also now looking at individual differences and neurodiversity, autistic trait. And then now here we are in Pavia, looking at, collaborating on this research project of metaphor learning in second language learning, second language learners. Yeah. Okay, so that's all. Thank you, and I'll take questions.
Thank you, Vicky. That was a fantastic talk. Thanks for sharing with us this preliminary findings that you have on so many exciting studies and
We just have to write them up. Yes.
yeah, well, I know that's
about, yeah.
yeah, but I look forward to discussing them further with you because they're really interesting, stimulating, and relevant for our research programs as well. But I will take a few questions from the audience. Federico?
The first one is the curiosity and clarification question. I was wondering, how do you make your participants more familiar with the concept of metaphor to allow them to use metaphors? How do you train them?
So let me think about, because there are many different studies, so I have to think it for one study. Okay, that study is actually not one of these. We actually went to the for that study, we went to the there's a Lakoff and Johnson page of index. Now it used to be hosted by Berkeley, and now it's Tokyo that's hosting this. So we asked them to look at those and say, okay, that's metaphor, basically. This is what a metaphor means for us.
I don't know what you're referring to. Which
I can because it's, how do I
always look for the list of the source and target domains, the list of the a list of metaphors that they compiled, that they put together, and that's also
yes,
something.
that is the list. So here, I will share,
Uh-huh.
do I share screen?
Thought it was something on the definition, so it's a list, okay.
This one.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, now then
Send.
then we know, yes.
Yeah. So you can, click on it and then say, okay, that's the metaphor. So that's one of the studies. Maybe Lindsay can tell us a little bit about how they.
Person, but that is not literally true. And we allow them to practice. So, maybe provided.
So for so what Lindsay say, and also for this project, they were writing about their emotion basically, and they're more, less interaction with the experimenter, they're more like doing it themselves. Because we asked them for their saddest memory of their life, so so it became a little sad, and so they actually then would say, okay, can you reconceptualize that? In, create a metaphor like this. So that was the first question, yeah.
Yes, and second one is more at the philosophical level. I was wondering whether, in your opinion, teaching highly complex concept would via metaphor, so making them more concrete, would alter the notion, the scientific reliability, let's say, of the concept. So whether your participants might develop a sort of misconception or.
Yes. So that's not a philosophical question. It's actually a very important question. And so what we did was we collaborate with let me see. So we have to have an expert. That's why there's this expert here. That's Dr. Molly Bulger from actually I can't. Let's see if we can. Yeah, so the first one, we asked Dr. Bulger to read through the metaphors and see if they are correct. Because most of our metaphor examples are biology concepts. So she will give us input. She gave us input to basically vet the correctness. So Lindsay and other actually previous the former postdoc, Kacha, and we think we're the metaphor experts, and then we have the biology expert to vet the concepts that we created and see if that works. I guess for Lindsay's project, we did ask Dr. Bulger to look at the ChatGPT created metaphors, right? So, and she, some were not very. Yeah, so maybe you're absolutely right. In fact, when I talked about this at Max Planck just in April, and then so at the Max Planck, there are 4 departments. One of them is called Gene and Language. Oh, so the director came to me after the Fisher. That's right, Simon Fisher. And he was very, what's the word? About whether a gene is a blueprint. He said that is a completely wrong metaphor. So if you talk to the expert, he would be like completely upset and everything about this whole popular conception of how gene is. Yeah, but yeah, so he adamantly talked about it for 30 minutes with me about one item out of the 80 items that is wrong. So yeah, so there is that. So we yeah, I hope we're not spreading the incorrect information, but we are looking at that. We're mindful about that.
But then participants are more accurate on literal information when they do, for instance, the multiple choice and verbal.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so they pick correct, they learn a concept and then they also learn inferences about that concept literally.
Yeah.
So it's not that, so perhaps the inferences that you can derive out of a metaphor like genes are blueprints, are not all correct.
Yeah.
But at least here you show that the inferences that they,
Yeah. Yeah.
right,
See the errors.
yeah.
See whether it is possible to recalibrate the training by looking at the errors that they might make based on metaphors.
Other questions? Veronica.
Hi.
For your role.
Yeah.
I'm interested in this, creativity measure that we use.
Okay.
And how we can grasp and symbolize these measures, so you use novelty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that there are other dimensions that usually are collected for metaphors like, difficulty can be related in this direction? Or
We did very little, so which one was it? Novel metaphor, novelty, and the other one is aptness only. What measure were you thinking about using?
because now we are working on different metaphors and we are using this measure of complexity.
Okay.
I'm interested in how we can put together all these metaphors, all these measures that are.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's great.
Right, so, if, I don't have good recommendation for you. So there are so many measures, so I would suggest that look at the creativity research to see, what kind of measures they have. But I picked two, novelty and aptness, purely based on past metaphor research. For example, Paul Thibodeau had looked at the, aptness and, because we're thinking, so the research question there is, if metaphors are more apt, do participants learn more? If it's a terrible metaphor, not apt, maybe they don't, they don't learn at all. So we think that could matter. And the issue with novelty is that whether, novel metaphors would encourage people to think more. Maybe conventionalized metaphors, people don't think twice about them. In fact, there was an ERP study that asked people to basically give people conventionalized metaphors and ask them to talk about it more. And then they found actually increased N400 after participants have deconventionalized. So if you say the branch of a bank, the branch is, people don't think about it anymore. It's why is that a metaphor? But then you say, okay, this is what conceptual metaphor theory is, and now you tell me why do you think the branch of the bank is a metaphor? And the participants say, oh, maybe it's tree branch, and then this, and then they're overthinking, and then now that becomes basically, I think the paper title is Resurrecting a Dead Metaphor, something like that. So we focus on those two measures, but I can imagine that your project, I don't know the details of your project, and I hope to hear about it more. But definitely look into the creativity research. That's a hot topic right now. How do you measure people's creativity? And another angle perspective is, well, what you think is novel, great, is appreciation, right? What is the painting that you appreciate is not, I don't necessarily like it. So you rated it as, creative, and I might not. So how do researchers accommodate those kinds of individual differences?
Other questions? And I will ask one. Luca, I didn't see it. That was later.
Well, I have two main questions. The first one is on the latency. Our studies, and when we use the hidden mark stuff. Do you retain any information about applications in this level of analysis? There's something you have when you do power frequency bands, okay? But here, you sacrifice this or you can keep it? I'm not familiar, so you don't say anything about that. I don't know if it's part of the pipeline or.
The scalp distribution of the
Yeah.
effect. This is not plotted by time, but you're saying the time course. Yeah, I think out of Yuhua's hundreds of slides, there was this time course. But I didn't focus on it because, you know, scalp distribution in ERP is less, you know, emphasized. So what do you think in the theory? What kind of-
comparison with previous works in the domain of the third language. So for
Yeah.
instance, going to the literature that connects creativity and humor generation, you
Yeah.
find other science creations, of course, that's something you find as well as creativity. So haha, versus haha moments.
Yeah,
It's kind of fusion title of papers.
yeah,
There, they do have something about this relationship between creativity in general and field language. They do talk about scale distributions of effects.
Yes, yeah.
Or they coherence analysis between regions. It's more frontal versus more posterior. So I was thinking here, do you retain any of the information?
Yeah.
Or not? I have no idea what to do with this. It seems very fancy, very novel.
Yeah.
And so it's you know.
yeah. I think so because we're focusing on the power in the alpha band. Alpha has so many functions associated with it. It could be attention like parietal alpha, and there could be some frontal alpha, like a symmetry here that could very frontal could be a depressive marker. So I think scalp distribution in this case, you know, based on your reasoning, is important. That we don't know what, you know, we can show that. So I'll have to dig into Yuhua's slides, the slides that she gave me to see where exactly they show up. Yeah. Yeah.
And then a quick curiosity is with respect to the pre and post experiment of leukocytes
Yeah,
thing. And you mentioned a fact which seems very reliable.
Yeah.
Is this confirmed within individuals? So you match at the second time for another the first time, or is it a group effect?
it's a group effect. It's a group effect so far, but we still haven't read, we're trying to write this up, but there's just, my sabbatical is coming this year, so I will have time to write that. So I can do that analysis.
Yeah,
Actually, so we think exactly.
It's much stronger, say each individual.
We think individual, yeah,
Large part of the
Yeah.
group of individuals show that first times they
Yeah.
have independent random. You don't know what
yeah.
exactly what I was.
Yeah.
suggesting.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I'll have to see if that analysis is possible because now I'm also thinking about how we randomize the items. But yeah, so we definitely should also look at, we think, actually, I think I correlate this with their learning outcome. So I correlate the ERP effects with the behavioral, like post-test minus pre-test kind of. And so there was correlation. The more with the N400 effect size. So
When the beginning. And they
yes.
discuss with the difference in a part.
Yeah. Because you could say, this N400 might not be what we think it is, because there are many kinds of N400, but then because it's associated with the behavioral learning improvement scores, then, you know, at least that score explains some of the variance that one can see in the N400 effects.
Too strong arguments.
Yeah,
Vicky, I really like this study. I think it's very clean. It also converges with our physical and mental metaphor study because we had the greater N400 for physical metaphors that are more concrete than the mental one, while the target word was equally concrete in the two conditions. So it was really a matter of having a more concrete and distributed representation. But I have a question on the other EEG study and particularly on alpha. So I go back to alpha again. I was particularly curious about this double effect that you have in alpha, both the alpha increase and the alpha decrease.
Yeah.
And I didn't catch precisely what's the functional interpretation that you give to the increase and the decrease.
Mhm.
And the reason why I'm interested in that is that not only there are very few EEG study on metaphor production, but in the spatial spectral domain with MEG, there are no studies on metaphor with MEG.
That's
We
right.
did
Yeah.
one, we are writing it down. And the robust finding is basically alpha decrease
Oh, okay,
in the comprehension.
okay.
So there's lower alpha, desynchronization, which in also in some region of interest, which include Broca's area and the right left inferior frontal gyrus
That's
and
the thing about
PPJ.
MEG. 'Cause
Yeah,
you effectively have the location information.
Yeah, yeah. And so the interpretation has to deal with basically the, in the context of the classic interpretation of alpha desynchronization as post-inhibition release. That's the typical, the classic, most basic interpretation that you can give to this general effect.
Yeah.
So there is like after inhibiting information, you collect a number of elements and then finally you grasp the intended meaning.
Yeah. Yes, so.
But it's clearly a decrease.
Yeah, but so Yuhua also connected this alpha desync with that. And in addition, she said that it has something to do with arousal as well.
Yeah.
She thinks that this, because
Who's thinking that?
Yuhua is the student that.
Okay.
Is
Okay.
the student
Okay.
that worked on this project. So she said arousal is related because so if you look at the desync plotted, alpha D is desynchronization. So the significant part is this one. So this is time locked to, this is seconds to response. So 0 is plotted here. That means when participants press the button to say, oh, I got a metaphor for this concept. So
it's backward. It's measured backward.
yes, backward for the response lock here. At the beginning is the audio recording of the description of the concept. So this is 0. So the so it's related to basically novelty. So they think that novel metaphors, they as in Yuhua thought that, and I as well, has to do with inhibition and novelty, and she thinks also arousal. Because in the end, like right before the response, you felt, more aroused by the novel metaphor you create by yourself and happy to. It's more like a delayed aha, according to her, but like an aha moment, like, hey.
And so this synchronization has this time course, while the increase, where was that? Not in the same windows, right?
Increase is not in the same window. Increase, so alpha state occupancy, this is the synchronization.
Yeah.
Alpha. So this is more significant here. And this is time, this time course, this is during seconds after onset. So this 0 is the, when basically they started listening to the audio recording of the description.
Okay.
The science concept. But this is so we're correlating the novel metaphors, novelty ratings. So
it's an interesting pattern. Yeah.
Yeah, we are writing it up actually as we speak. Even I think this morning she just sent another version of the manuscript. So
we are also writing it.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a struggle to look for interpretation of this alpha pattern because it's
yeah. But you didn't find any synchronization pattern, only desynchronization.
There is some synchronization related in the region of interest analysis related to greater social skills. So when you look at region of interest and individual differences, there's a correlation between theory of mind skills, social skills, measured with the reading the mind in the IUSS test, and alpha synchronization.
In the TPJ.
No, that's in broadcast.
That's okay, that's okay.
Which we, yeah,
I was not-
it would have been nice,
Yeah.
but didn't show up in TPJ.
Okay.
That would have been nice.
It's
Easier to interpret, but it didn't.
No.
So we interpreted like the people with, greater social skills have to basically focus more on inhibited more internally related processes. Because we found a paper that,
Okay.
but we'll discuss that later because it's
Sort of makes
relevant.
sense.
I have a last question that I would like to ask.
Okay.
You link your project and the ERC,
Mhm.
which is the reason of the visit. You know, the main topic of the ERC
Mhm.
is the involvement of mental imagery in the derivation of metaphorical meaning in
Right.
the inferences that you make.
Yeah.
You had this nice prediction that the underlying process in learning through metaphors is that metaphor makes concept more concrete.
Yeah.
Do you think that mental imagery plays a role in this?
Imagery and concreteness are always highly correlated and interrelated. Yeah, I mean, so if we go back to those ERP concreteness effects, they have actually, in addition to their concreteness N400, there is an N700 effect. And that N700 effects seems to have a lot to do with imagery and simulation.
But just to give you an example, do you think that if you present the picture of the cell like a city, so some parts are pictured like houses, and then there's street, and then there's this thing, or the leukocyte with a helmet, I don't know, things like that. Do you think it will work better only with the verbal material? So when you prompt really visual images.
So we actually have a project like that, but we never went through with it. So there is a professor at the University of Arizona in the Department of Geoscience. He's got a textbook with 67 images, visual metaphor images. So we wanted to take his, and we are still in contact with him to take his in and see if we use, but the problem with that project that was on hold because we couldn't find the literal, well, what can we find? There are several problems with the textbook images. There were some words here and there.
Was multimodal.
So then we have to, you do that too.
Yeah.
To take out, if we take out the words, some metaphors. Like what?
We know. The other has some experience in that.
Secondly, this visual image tells a story, like it's long, and then we don't know how to fit that in the EEG time session, like EEG session, like if it's a long session. So, but we could do that behaviorally. But then there comes to another, I think it's almost conflict of interest because he uses the textbook to teach in his geoscience course. So if we use that textbook to test, then we're like testing the validity of that textbook. I don't know. So there are some issues, different kind of pragmatism. But yes, to answer your question more directly, we thought about that, and we thought we start with words first. But yes, but we have those, so we could revisit those.
It's an interesting topic.
But actually, so let me just reply. I know I think I wonder if with second language learners, if that would be more effective than words. Yeah.
Well, as a first lady, you will hear it in our presentation, but basically tomorrow, there's Federico will talk about the experiments that we're doing to capture mental images, if any, during verbal metaphor processing.
Okay.
Really to see when you process a metaphor, do you picture
Yeah.
something or,
Visualize,
yeah,
yeah.
do you visualize, which is different from testing visual metaphors.
Internally generated
Yeah,
image as
yeah.
opposed to externally.
Exactly,
stimulated
exactly.
image. Yeah.
We're doing
That's very
both,
cool.
we're doing both, but they're different things.
Yeah, yeah.
But of course, once you assume that there are mental images and that they are beneficial for the understanding, then you can promote learning by encouraging these
Yeah.
images via
Yeah.
multimodal metaphors.
Yes.
But multimodal metaphors might be difficult.
Yeah.
Piaggio has some multimodal metaphors of climate change
Yeah.
that were quite difficult for
Yeah.
participants to understand.
And what you are also so I also noticed one thing. So what you're doing is actually metaphor production, but visual metaphor and internal production.
Yeah.
Versus it,
Exactly.
here, the project that I said that we were doing, is currently on hold, is focusing on comprehension, right? Because the geoscience, those images in that textbook, they are created by the geoscience expert, the professor.
Yeah.
And it's a comprehension, it's perception versus
Yeah, I got
generation.
it.
Yeah, yours more internally generated.
Super interesting. I think it's gonna be a very nice week for us. Okay, we thank our speaker. Thank you, Vicky.